When we talked about realism, we talked about how there are different realist theories embedded within realism. And the same thing is true for liberalism. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about three versions of liberalism. And the liberal theories are more compatible with one another than hegemonic stability theory and balance of power theory were within realism. They don't exactly contradict each other. They just emphasize different things and attack realism in different ways. And I'm hopefully going to clarify that for you. So the first approach, and a very common approach that's a liberal approach, is we call liberal institutionalism. And it essentially is what I've already introduced to you in this sort of liberal reading of The Prisoner's Dilemma. For liberal institutionalism, the question is, how do states solve various versions of the prisoner's dilemma, including the security dilemma, but also trade negotiations, and so on. And they do that by forming institutions. Institutions help share information, they help monitor compliance, they do lots of things to make it easier for states to cooperate with one another and to make them less worried that they're going to get cheated on. So some examples in some different areas of international affairs that I've just pointed out here are the World Trade Organization, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Paris Climate Agreement. And I point out the International Atomic Energy Agency because this is one that really comes to a core security issue. But states find that they would rather submit their nuclear reactors to inspection by this international agency that have their neighbors worry that they might be getting nuclear weapons. And so that's why that works. Complex interdependence is an approach that says there are a lot of actors out there, right? International politics is not just about states. It's about companies, it's about non-governmental organizations, and so on and so forth. Moreover, it's about a lot of issues. It's about security, but it's also about wealth, and it's also about the environment, and it's about health, and it's about culture. The big point is that for most of these actors, and on most of these issues, survival is not an issue, right? And so security does not drive international politics. So it's not that they say that realism is wrong per se, but rather that they say it only pertains to a fairly narrow slice of what goes on in international politics, and there's a lot of other important, interesting stuff going on where realism simply doesn't apply very well. A third school of thought is what's called the democratic peace. And we're going to talk about this in a lot of detail in the future, but right now I'll just summarize it for you. And the argument is, for realism, states are all the same, right? And states simply have interests. The argument of the democratic peace theory is that states are not all the same, that democracies behave differently, and in particular, that they don't go to war with one another. So the argument then is that among democracies, anarchy is surmountable. It no longer leads to the security dilemma and to conflict. And as I said, we'll say more about this later. What I want to stress is that these three schools of liberal thought depart from realism in different ways. Complex interdependence theory and democratic peace theory question realism assumptions. They basically say, if your assumptions are wrong, well, then your theory's got to be wrong too, right? They say it's not the case that states are the only actors. It's not the case that security is always scarce. And in particular, democratic peace theory says it's not the case that all states behave the same. So if those things aren't true, then the consequences obviously become irrelevant. Liberal institutionalism takes almost the exact opposite tack in arguing with realism. What liberal institutionalism says is, we will accept all of your assumptions. States are rational, they're concerned for their security, it's a self-help world, they find themselves in a security dilemma. We'll take all of your assumptions, but we're going to show that they don't necessarily lead where you say they do. Right? So if we take all of your assumptions and show that they don't lead to the conclusions you say, well, then we feel like we've made a pretty good case. So the question to leave you with for right now is, which version of liberalism seems most compelling to you so far, accepting that we're going to talk more about this.